Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second lecture of week 3 on dimensioning and templates and units, and I'll do a little drawing too. So this is just a follow-up to the first one we did, working with scale. But before I do that, I want to show you a few things with the units and making sure you're in the correct units, because we will get some metric drawings fairly soon. Or some architectural drawings, which you might want some different units, and then some engineering drawings. So I'm going to minimize myself a little and go to the software. When you come into AutoCAD, it will load the default template. For you, that's going to be ACAD because you haven't changed it, I'm sure. Mine's defaulted to a layout A and a layout B template that I created. That's why I have these paper spaces down here. If you go into the red A and you hit new, it's going to ask you what template you want to use. The default is the AutoCAD template. So that one is thinking in inches and tenths of an inch, typically 4 decimal places and a bunch of just typical settings for AutoCAD. That's the template that you've been running unless you have switched it. If you want a metric template, that's going to be the ISO template. Then it's going to think in millimeters. And remember, millimeters are really small. Now, sometimes you're going to be like, what unit am I in? I'm going to show you how to determine what unit you're in right now. So you can test it yourself before you start drawing. It's much easier to figure it out before you start than after you've drawn for a while. To try and get that unit switched is kind of difficult. So we can do it, but it's difficult. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and open the ISO template. So now it's thinking in millimeters, okay? Now, if I draw a line, I'm gonna draw a line, I'll pick a start point. I'm literally gonna draw at 1 millimeter. So I'm just going to put in 1 and hit enter. So I should be able to, and then I'll hit escape. I should be able to zoom in and see that 1 millimeter. Well, in model space, it's hard to tell if that's a millimeter or a foot or an inch. You can't tell by zooming in. I could dimension it and it would say 1. But again, how do I know that's 1 inch or 1 millimeter? I'm going to show you how to test it. And also hopefully this will enhance your understanding of paper space. So if I go into layout 1, in layout, you have things called viewports. That's what allows me to see the model. So I'm going to click into model and I'll zoom back a little bit so I can see my 1 millimeter. There it is, my 1 millimeter line. Okay. Now it looks like the grid is on. I'm going to turn the grid off. That's that button right there. And I'm going to go back into paper space. And I'm going to take this viewport. That's what's allowing me to see the model. I'm just going to open it up a little bit. Okay. If I was to delete that viewport, I wouldn't be able to see the model. Right. Now, I want to determine if that's truly 1 millimeter. So what I'm going to do in model space is I'm going to set the scale to 1:1. So that should give me 1 millimeter on this piece of paper. Now, if it was an inch, and my paper is 11 inches wide, an inch would look pretty big. If it was a millimeter, it's going to look really small. Now, get this, you can also now switch to paper space, and I can zoom into this thing, and I can actually set a dimension in paper space and still grab an object in model space. And it should say 1 millimeter. So I think I missed this endpoint. Let me try that again. Erase that. And mention it one more time. Now, the metric system has a unique dimensioning style where it uses commas. But yeah, it says it's 1. Again, the only way I know that it is a millimeter is by zooming back, seeing the whole piece of paper, and looking at how small that is. Okay. Now, an inch is 25.4 millimeters. So if I was to come into model space and draw a line 25 25.4 millimeters. That's an inch. Okay, so I'm pretty convinced that that one is a millimeter super small, and that that's an inch much bigger. All right, so that's how you can tell what unit you're working in. So that was, if I go to the red A and hit new, that was the ISO for metric. Now I'm going to jump back into mine, the one that I created, and we will go over creating templates and saving templates. You can probably look that up yourself and make it happen. But I also want to talk about units. Units are just how your system is going to display itself. So if I type in units, yeah, I'm sure there's a quick button up there somewhere, but again, I don't use them, so I'm a typer. You can see that I'm set to architectural style, which then it shows me the style right there. So architectural style, it'll take the apostrophe for feet, which is really nice. And then just a regular number accepts inches. You don't have to put in the quote for inches. Okay, and there's many different ones that you can choose. There's decimal. This is also going to be the display of the numbers. So in architectural, the numbers will display in a fractional form. And in decimal, it'll be decimal, obviously. In engineering, it'll go to a foot and inch decimal. And then in fractional, it'll be just straight fractions. So some different kinds of units you can use, and then that impacts your ability to input a number. So if you want to input apostrophe for feet, you've got to be in some kind of unit that allows that. Okay. All right. I want to do scale again, just to walk you through that, and basic dimensioning. So dimensioning is here, and if you pull down the annotation, you'll get to see the different styles. So text has its own style that you can manipulate. Dimensioning has its own style. That's this one. This one's text. Leaders have their own style, which you can manipulate. Okay. So there's also a table. If you want to input a table, you can manipulate the styles. So those all can be manipulated individually, and you can have multiple styles. So if I click on the text, you'll see that I'm given two. I'm given standard, which means it's not going to look at this scale here, and it's not going to work well with paper space. But you might want to use standard if you were just placing text in paper space, because there's no reason to scale anything there, okay? And maybe you want your text in paper space to be a different font or a different size than the dimensioning text. So you control that by different styles, and you can make as many different styles as you want. So you can make new ones, you can have them annotative. That's what that symbol means. And this one's actually called annotative, just to remind you that it is annotative, which means it's going to look at this scale, and it's going to take its paper text and manipulate that paper text by that scale. So then you can put it into layout and it'll show up. If the style does not match the layout, it will not show up in layout. Let me demonstrate that. So I'm going to choose an annotative text, 3/16, and we will say that it's 1 to 100. Okay. So now I'm going to type in some single line text, and I'll go 0 for the rotation angle, and I'll say this is 1 to 100 text. Okay, so there it is, 1 to 100 text goes in, it looks like that. And then if I come to the A size paper, and I do a zoom all, and I set the scale to 1 to 100, that will match. I should be able to find it somewhere. Let's see here. Find it. There it is. Okay. So let me put the scale back and hit the roller mouse. 1 to 100. Oh, where'd it go? Come back here. All right. I'm going to keep looking for this forever. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say move this to 0, 0. So there's an absolute input, which it didn't do. Move here to 0, 0. Oh, it's going to move it so I can find it easily. All right, let's go back into this. Should be right there. And I'll get my scale going at 1 to 100. Maybe I keep choosing the wrong one there. Sure, you all saw that. All right. So with the scale factor set to 1 to 100, the text shows up. If I choose 100 to 1, obviously the text isn't going to show up. I think that's what I was doing. All right. So if I change this to like 1 to 50, it changes the zoom, right? You saw the zoom change, but then the text disappears. And that's because the two scale factors don't match. When you use annotative anything, that annotative scale must match your layout viewport scale, okay? So go back to 1 to 100 and my text will show up. All right. So that's just kind of a big piece when you're working with dimensioning and when you're working with text and layout. Those scales have to match, okay? And you set that scale by being in here in the viewport, okay? Once you get it in here, so we need the drawing drawn. We need to know how big it is, right? Once we get the drawing drawn and we're thinking about dimensioning and putting text in and kind of finishing the thing off, before you do that, you want to go to layout and you want to set up that scale and figure it out. Then go back to model space and you can create your dimensioning and your text. So I'm going to go ahead and draw something. I'm just going to come over and come over. 1 to 100 is pretty dang big, so maybe I go 1,000. So then I'll go up 500 over 1,000. No idea. Doing this off the cuff, so I don't even know if this will fit. Oh, that's terrible. So you got to watch your object snaps and make sure that those graph. I keep missing it big time because I'm just the cursor's a little jerky this morning. All right, let's go into layout and just see what we get at 1 to 100. I'm going to see if I can find my object. There it is. And so I'll bring it on the screen. I'm going to forget about my text, but let's just see what we get at 1 to 100. It's a little big, so I'm going to go back and say, okay, 1 to 50 seems like a big jump down. Oops, wrong way. I don't have any more options, right? 1 to 100 is as big as I got. So I need to make a custom one. So that's at the very bottom, custom. Now this is a little tricky, so you might want to make note of this. I'm going to add, right? I'm going to create one. And this area is the name. So I'm going to call it 1 to 125. Okay. And here is where you actually set it up. 1 to 125. So the name should match your scale. All right, I'm going to say OK. And it puts it in up above. That's just kind of what it does. And it says OK, but it doesn't activate it. I'm still 150, 1 to 50. So I'm going to find it 1 to 125. And oh, that looks good. It's a little tight, but it's a simple drawing. So I think I could still get my dimensions. I'd probably actually back it up a little more. But let me just show you now. Now that I know in model space, I need a scale down here of 1 to 125. And then when I dimension whatever I have set up there, we'll plop it in. May look small here in model space, but in paper space, it should look appropriate and show up. So let's just see. Yeah, it's good. And it's coming in at the 3/16 text height. So I match those up. If my scale was different, if this was the wrong scale, or my viewport was like back to 1 to 100, that dimension would disappear. See how it's gone? Yeah, all of those are the wrong scale factor. The only time that's going to show up is when you match. All right, I hope that helps. It helps with your dimensioning. Work with those snaps on your exercises. They're tricky. And reach out to me if you have any more questions. I can always make a kind of a more focused video if you're having trouble with a certain area. All right, take care.